Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is sponsored by Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with the intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Products include Westlaw, Practical Law, and Firm Central legal practice management software for small law firms. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Welcome. Access to Democracy returns. Alan Miller with you as usual. And we have a first-time guest today, Alan Malkis, who is a senior program evaluator for Ramsey County, which is what, Alan? And welcome to us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Senior program evaluator means that I do a lot of number crunching and statistics and try to help the folks in the area I serve are people who provide services to children in Ramsey County. So try to help them figure out if they're doing a good job, what's going well, where they might need to tweak something.
And you've been there for just a while.
I've been there for about 8 years now.
Yeah. Okay. You have a master's degree, I believe, in sociology.
Mm-hmm.
And also, really, one of the things that required. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about was an inspirational talk that you gave. Now, you're a member of Or Emmett, which is the secular humanistic organization here in Minnesota.
Right, the Minnesota Congregation for Humanistic Judaism.
And on the Jewish high holidays this past year, you gave what is described as a really inspirational talk, short, based on your own perceptions and background. So before we get into really what is much more topical at the moment, tell us what that talk entailed.
Well, on the high holidays, one of the services that's held is called the Kol Nidre service, and it's traditionally in a time when you look back over promises or intentions you had in the previous year that maybe you didn't manage to fulfill, and think about how you'd like to do better in the following year. So I decided to talk about 3 areas where I wished I had done more. And this is just my personal observations and feelings about it. But
there were personal observations that got some very positive reactions.
They did. I was gratified that people seemed to enjoy it. It was pretty short, about 5 minutes or something. Do you want me to sort of paraphrase it here for you?
Paraphrase it, and
okay.
Yeah.
At that time of year, at the high holidays, it's a time for reflection, like I said, for looking back on what didn't happen and what might be good in the year to come. And I thought of 3 sort of social issues that are important to me, where I thought there was more that I could do in the coming year. I said the first thing was, I'm privileged by being a white man in this society. I don't have to worry when I'm driving down the street that some cop is going to pull me over because of the color of my skin. They may pull me over for some other reason, but not because of the color of my skin. And if they do pull me over, they're not going to be as nervous or as worried or as suspicious as they might be if I was black. And I really want to make a difference in changing the way in which black men in particular, but all black people and people of color are treated in this society, particularly by the police. So I want to stand up. I want to be more active in speaking out when incidents happen, in supporting the black community, in trying to get justice in these cases. That was one of the things.
To level the playing field as to our projections of people, perceptions of people, I should say.
Just to level the playing field in terms of treatment of people, primarily, and to reduce the number of times that people are killed for what later seems like very little reason. The second thing I was thinking about was, and this was in the midst of the election season, I was thinking about the revelations about the way in which one of the presidential candidates talked about his dealings with women. He was caught on tape some years ago talking about how he liked to harass women, he liked to grab them, he could get away with it because he had money and he was powerful. And I said, you know, it's my responsibility when I hear another man say something like this, which doesn't happen that often, but I need to make it clear that that's not an acceptable thing, that that's not, you know, just sort of fun and games. It's really got an impact on women and on men that's bad. And I want to speak up and be more proactive about that. So that was the second thing. And then I sort of widened my lens a little bit. One of the things we talk about in our services at Oramet is how we're all connected, we're all part of the human family. And I talked about the fact that climate change is very much influenced by, let's say, accelerated by our consumption of chemicals and petroleum products and things like that for power. And here in America, we use a great deal of the world's power. We use a great deal of the world's energy resources with a pretty small amount of the world's population.
And we are the second largest polluter in the world.
There you go. That's a good statistic, which I hadn't remembered. Well, what can I do individually to make a difference with that? I want to be a little more aware of what I'm doing personally in terms of my energy use, but I want to speak up, contact my elected officials, and try to be involved in trying to reduce that, to change that direction, so that we don't endanger the millions, the billions of people who live in low-lying areas that are going to be flooded when the oceans rise. They live in areas that are going to be much more negatively affected by climate change than we are, because we have the resources to deal with it. It's not fair to the other billions of human beings that that we continue down this path. So I'm trying to do what I can with that. I've been to a few protests about the Dakota pipeline, and I've been doing some other things, you know, contacting my legislators in state and federal to try to give them an idea of where I think we should be going.
So really what you were saying is that you were thinking back about starting the new year in terms of services and of yourself, what you could do to change or make yourself a better person and help make the world a better place in the new year, which is, you know, it's a pretty ambitious.
It's very ambitious, and I don't believe that alone I can do any of that, but I think if I work together with other people.
But each voice, which is added to another voice, which is added to another voice, can become a loud and overwhelming voice.
Yes.
And I do believe, notwithstanding, in fact, I am about to work on an article, notwithstanding the results of this election, that people of conscience are the majority. And it didn't work out that way because of the Electoral College. Certainly the vote showed that one candidate had almost 3 million more votes than the other one, the one who's successful, the one whose name troubles me just to think about it. But yeah, And we have to really forge ahead on our own, one person at a time, peoples of conscience, to make this a better world or a safer world, or to accept what 99% of scientists say is a fact as we sit here in the beginning of March in Minnesota without any snow on the ground, and there hasn't been any snow on the ground for weeks and weeks and weeks. Is it an aberration? I don't think so. Are these terrible tornadoes an aberration? I don't think so. Are the rising waters and the fact that our two poles are becoming much warmer an aberration? I don't think so. So I would guess you would accord with those.
I would, yeah.
Now, since the election, there has been a spate, a rise of a lot of prejudicial conduct. And in particular, I'm referring to anti-Semitism. There have been dozens and dozens of events directed toward anti-Semitism. Do you relate that to the conduct of the election, or what?
I think that the election was conducted and the campaign was conducted in a way that made it more comfortable for people to express feelings that maybe hadn't been considered acceptable for a while. I think it emboldened and empowered a group of people who have been sitting there thinking, writing, and talking amongst themselves about these things for a long time, but never felt that they had much protection or legitimacy. And they feel, rightly or wrongly, that the new administration is going to give them that legitimacy and protection. And I think I heard the statistic last night that there have been over 110 bomb threats and incidents of anti-Semitic graffiti and vandalism in cemeteries and so on in the last few months.
Well, St. Louis and Philadelphia.
And
both
Rochester, New York now.
That was the newest one, right? Had cemeteries desecrated, gravestones that are hundreds of years old, overturned, damage that in some cases is irreparable. But traditionally, over the years, anti-Semitism seems to be the first place that bigots go. Now, in the case of our nation, there's been a big uprising against the Muslim population. Unfairly, we've had several imams on this show talking about that, and the fact that these people who are coming into this country don't want anything more than what we wanted, and we're all immigrants to this country except for the Native Americans, who we have abused terribly. The treaties that we have formulated with them and then we break, relegating them to really secondary living without adequate education. But above it all, anti-Semitism seems to be the first place that bigots go in the last 100 years or so.
You know, I'm not sure I'd agree with that. I'd have to say that in America it's racism. That's number one. It has been for hundreds of years, and it still is. I appreciate the outpouring of support that there's been for the Jewish community in the wake of these terrible threats and the vandalism and painting of swastikas and so on. But we have to remember that to me, that pales in comparison to what particularly African Americans experience every day. There's a lot more actual death, a lot more actual injury, a lot more actual violence carried out against African Americans on it. It's so normal that we don't make a big deal about it.
Well taken point, yeah. Now, you just attended a function in St. Paul yesterday, I understand.
Yes.
Tell us about that, what it was and where it went.
Well, a few weeks ago, at the end of February, the Jewish Community Center in St. Paul received a bomb threat, and everybody inside children who were there for childcare, senior citizens who were there, everybody who was inside had to evacuate. The police and the firefighters came. They took everybody out. So this was one of, like I said, over 110 such threats that have been made around the country. No one yet has actually been hurt. There haven't been any actual bombs detonated, but these threats happen, and it really takes a toll on people. Last night, the city of St.
However,
Paul...
there was a Jewish center where a gunman shot
I just heard that last night. I hadn't known about that. So there was
shot 9 people, walked into
well, that, yes.
Dylan
some
Roof,
months
I
ago.
think, was his name, or something.
Well, that was the
similar to
fellow who shot people at the church in Maryland. They shot African Americans.
that was the- yes.
But there was a place in Kansas City where a
Right.
number of people were shot by an anti-Semitic person, and not in the most recent string of incidents, but yes, in the not too distant
But there has
past.
been violence against
Yes.
bodies, violence against human. I mean, I'm old enough
Yes.
to have been alive during World War II to see members of my family go overseas
Mm-hmm.
during World War II. And what's even worse, to find that relatives who I never had a chance to meet never made
Right.
it out of the camps. They were slain.
Yeah.
They were exterminated in World War II. And that left really a lasting impression with me, which is kind of a sad way to look
Yeah.
at things. But
Well, let me continue about the event last night. In response to that event, the City of St. Paul and a group I've been associated with for a while called Jewish Community Action organized a sort of a community gathering to stand up in solidarity with the Jewish Community Center and to express rejection of that kind of anti-Semitism. And it was a wonderful event. There were more people than could be accommodated in the auditorium of the Highland Community Center, which is where this was held, which is about 5 blocks from the Jewish Community Center itself. The mayor of St. Paul was there and spoke. 2 city council members spoke. And what was really impressive was that, first of all, the message started by saying that anti-Semitism is unacceptable. But the messages went on to say that hatred that targets any group of people is unacceptable in St. Paul, and we hope in the United States. And we had, as I said, the elected officials who spoke. We had some rabbis who spoke. We had the head of the local Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, who spoke. We had 3 representatives of the NAACP chapter in Minneapolis. We had a woman representing an Hispanic organization, a Latina group, and one of the Hmong City Council member, Dai Tao from St. Paul, also spoke. So all different nationalities and faiths were represented, and they all gave the same message, and it was really inspiring. And it was a wonderful, I was very glad to have the opportunity to be there. If anybody wants to see it, I believe the video is on the website of Jewish Community Action. And you can check there.
And I understand that the crowd was so large that they had over 100 people outside
Yes.
listening by sound who couldn't get into the auditorium.
And they were also live streaming it on Facebook, I believe. I don't know how that's done, but I hear it's a thing, so.
When it comes to technical things, I can't help you there either.
Right.
But and you mentioned Jewish Community Action. Now, what is that? And what's their involvement with all this?
Well, Jewish Community Action is a group that was formed, let me try to get my memory straight here. So I was in the room, so it was in the 90s. There was a lot of work going on in the Twin Cities then on metropolitan issues. And one person who was involved in that work said, you know, there ought to be a Jewish group that takes on these issues, even if they're not Jewish issues. They're issues that are important to our community and our society, and Jews should be active. This was a guy named Frank Hornstein, who went on to become a state representative and now a state senator. And Frank invited me and several other people to help form this new organization. And it was dedicated to working on affordable housing and to working on other issues that would help everybody in the community. And one of the things I was remembering is that at the very beginning of that effort, we flew to Chicago to see a group there that had a long history called Jewish Council on Urban Affairs. And what they said really stuck in my mind. They said, we go out and work on issues that are important to the Latino community in Chicago. We work on issues important to the Black community. We work on issues important to unions. We work on issues important to all different groups in the community. They don't have to be Jewish issues. He said, what we believe is that if we show up and support all these other communities, when we have a need, those other communities will show up and support us. And what I saw at the gathering last night, I think, was a testament to the good work that Jewish Community Action has done in the Twin Cities. That's what people were saying. They were saying, we're here for the Jewish community because JCA was there for us.
Well, it's really interesting because in the St. Louis and Philadelphia cemetery desecrations, the first people who offered assistance were from the Muslim community. Mm-hmm. They even went on Facebook in St. Louis to raise $20,000, and in 2 days they had raised $100,000 in pledges to help restore that cemetery. And that goes directly to what you're saying here. And that is pretty much a feeling that we have here, fortunately, in Minnesota. Minnesota has always been a progressive community. And we have our problems, but they have always been on the cutting edge of really civil action and civic action. So,
and there was in the Twin Cities, in the Star Tribune, I think there was a big ad taken out by the Islamic community offering their support and solidarity and pledging to help the Jewish Community Center. So that was really very much appreciated.
And I think the Jewish community in the current national atmosphere of prejudice against Muslims has been very outspoken in that regard.
For the most part, I think there are still, unfortunately, some portions of the official organized Jewish community which are less supportive and have a little bit more, a little bit of a tinge of anti-Muslim feeling in their activities and their pronouncements. I think it's very unfortunate, but it has a lot to do with the tensions in Israel and Palestine. And I know that the majority of Jews in this country do not feel that way. I think they
And actually, the majority
supportive.
of Jews in Israel don't feel that way either.
There was an interesting statistic mentioned last night by the head of the Council on American Islamic Relations, who said there was a poll done. What percent of people of different religions think that there's anti-Muslim sentiment in America? 60% of Muslims said yes, there's anti-Muslim sentiment in America. 66% of Jews said there's anti-Muslim sentiment.
That's
So
interesting.
the Jews, because of our, I would guess, because of our experience of being targeted and hated,
historical
we're very
background,
sensitive to
right.
that. Yeah.
The historical background is there for just that. I was in New York last weekend, and I heard a rabbi give a sermon, and the focus of it was decency. And why can't we have more decency in terms of attitudes, in terms of politicians, in terms of how we approach problems. And, and it was a very moving discussion or sermon, which just dovetails with what you've been saying here. So interestingly, what started with you with a talk back several months ago has sort of progressed right into current events.
Yeah,
And-
definitely.
What's the message that you take from this, or what's the message you can leave with our viewers?
Well, I think the message is that Americans have had a lot of experience of various people trying to divide us up and whip up sentiment against people who are different. And for the most part, in the long run, Americans have come through on the right side and said, wait a minute, that's not who we want to be. That's not the way we want to be. Whatever our religious upbringing, our religion does not tell us to hate other people and despise them for their skin or for their religion and their beliefs. So my message, the message that I take from all of this, is that there really is an opportunity to remind ourselves of that tradition in America and to build on it and reinforce it.
And we have a long way to go.
Yep.
There is no question about it. In my mind, the complexion, and I mean that by way of complexion, of America 50 years from now will be very different, because I remember when, and there was just a good movie on it, when people of different races could not by law marry.
Right.
And I'm trying to think of the name of that movie. But,
Loving.
Loving, right. An outstanding movie this past year. And that's gone by the wayside. So much has. Intermarriage is very relevant. And I think, from your congregation, certainly intermarriage probably represents a large portion of the people in there.
Yeah, I would say the last time I remember thinking about it, something like 90% of the couples at Oramet, one member was born Jewish and one wasn't. It's one of the few places where that's the situation in my relationship, and it's one of the few places where we feel really welcomed as equals in a Jewish community.
And it's basically what you're saying is everyone is welcome.
Yes.
In that organization. And, that's good for people to know also, and people who are watching also. I take it you have a website?
Oramet.org. So that's OREMET.org. You can find the calendar, you can find all kinds of stuff about the various programs we're going to have and so on.
And obviously you are active in the Social Action Committee.
I am.
That would go without saying based on your long number of years in social action. Mm-hmm. Well, it's really been nice talking to someone of conscience who then translates it into action, as you have. And we have a half minute left. Any thoughts in closing out?
Well, I think, as one of the speakers said last night, it's great to be here and to speak in solidarity with other people. The really important thing is that we actually carry that into action and we do something. We show up when a community is being threatened. We show up to say it's not okay with us if our brothers and sisters over here are being threatened and attacked. So just as all those communities have shown up for our Jewish community in the wake of these threats, we want to be able to show up for the Muslims, we want to be able to show up for African Americans, for the Hmong, and for all the communities.
And we've been talking with Alan Malkis, who works for Ramsey County, but whose conscience spreads all over Minnesota. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alan.